to me, it felt very real as someone who lives in Los Angeles and is an actress. It felt frighteningly real.
Guys, give it up for the team behind The Uninvited. Guys, welcome to South by. This is your first interview?
This is.
Yes. Well, I'm honored. Thank you. Nadia, you are the writer-director behind The Uninvited. So set this one up for us. Who was not invited where? What is the premise?
Well, that's a great question because I think the who is the uninvited changes as the story sort of unfolds. And initially, you may think that it is Helen, the character played by Lois Smith. You might think it's Rose, played by Elizabeth Reaser. You might think it's Walton or Ava, or every single person, every character goes through a cycle of being sort of not wanted at this party. But I think that overall, after you kind of go through these different sort of episodes within the story, you realize that the uninvited is time itself, the passing of time, because they're all sort of stuck in the past and what they can't let go of and what they need to let go of. So,
can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind the piece?
Yes, actually, it based on a real life experience where my husband and I, who happens to be played by Walton, so sort of weird, we were getting ready to throw a party when an elderly woman showed up in our driveway, believing she'd return home. And so that...
So this is a biopic.
Yes, but it's not. Let's just say.
The setup is true to life.
Is absolutely
where it
true.
goes from there.
But actually what it was it resolved very quickly. And it was an elderly woman who'd gotten turned around, and she was in her car. She was in a Prius, just like in the movie. And she wanted to know how to get into the garage. And in about 15 or 20 minutes, I helped her figure it out. We called the police, and they took her home. But I was profoundly affected by this experience. And then the party, people started showing up at the party, and I kept trying to tell people about this woman. And there was something about this experience of not only the distress of the woman, but the sort of feeling of the party guests that they were immune to this, the features of all of our lives, this mortality. So I think that was the inspiration for me, was to want to pop that bubble for them, for myself, but also to retrieve this older woman who obviously was in distress and had her own story. But why was I so connected to that story was I was vanishing from my own life at that period of time, because I was a woman who had worked my whole life and just had a child and found myself at home with the child, and I was a stranger to myself. And I saw this older woman who had become a stranger to herself. And so there was this twinning disorientation between the two of us. And so I kept imagining the story of a woman. What if she didn't get taken home? What if she came in to wait for someone to come pick her up? And the party continued on outside. And so that was and then Rose, who Elizabeth played so incredibly beautifully as this woman who was balancing this one foot in the outside world, one foot still stuck in the house, And then Ava plays the younger woman who can come and go freely because she's not encumbered yet. She's not in this domestic space. She's not the mother yet. She's not responsible yet. But as the evening proceeds, she becomes, anyway. So it's a long answer to your question.
No, that's
Sorry.
great. That was great. You said it. You set it up perfectly. And for the illustrious cast, I would love to hear from each of you on your characters were set up. But tell us a little bit about why they appealed to you and the story at large. Elizabeth, do you want to start?
I was really drawn to, the script was just amazing. It was so fun to read. I feel like Nadia is such a funny writer, but also really cuts through BS. And I was really, her voice really spoke to me. And the character of Rose, the woman that I play, I found to be really struggling inside she's a former actress, and she's, living in Los Angeles, trying to have some self-worth, and is quite broken, I think, in some ways when the movie begins, and is in a complicated marriage, and it all just really spoke to me.
And Lois, the legendary Lois Smith. Oh, you can take this mic right here. Sorry.
I don't know what
limited on
happened to mine. When I first I met Nadia and we talked, and then I read this, which I was always so intrigued by it, this double life, double story, more than double, but it takes place in the Hollywood Hills, in a house, and the house is so important. There's this house, and my character is an intruder, and an intruder in a life which is already fraught. And I always considered Rose, Elizabeth's beautiful performance as Rose, the center, and then I nudge into it. So I'm waiting to see what works, because now the movie's out there, and we'll find out what it does to people.
Walton, what spoke to you about this movie?
Well, I actually didn't have a choice, because so everybody else had that choice. I didn't. My marriage was contingent upon it. No, look, I've been fortunate enough to read my wife's writing for 19 years. We've been together a very long time, and have been looking for this day for a really long time to get on the boards together, as it were. And this was originally a play, and I read it during every iteration, and it just brought tears to my eyes. I didn't think that I was going to get the opportunity to play Sammy, and it just came about, as the movie picked up steam. And I was just so taken with everyone's story. But for Sammy, who's kind of throwing this party, the reasons why he's throwing it become evident as the movie goes along, and the stakes that are there for him and for everyone involved. It's like we're all stuck, and then this stranger comes to town, and we're all fundamentally changed by the end of it. And that was with me from the very beginning, the very early drafts that I read, 5 years ago when it was a play, to what we ultimately filmed. And it's funny as but then when it lands, it lands, and it says something about this world that we live in.
Ava, how about you? What excited you the most about The Uninvited?
So when I first read it, I realized I needed to play this character. I needed this script. It really made me feel identified. Ava, I'm a mother. I have a 4-year-old kid, and this really connected me to my own motherhood and how lonely I felt when I had my kid, trying to maintain a career. I remember that I was desperate after having my kid, desperate to prove the world that I could still function, that I could still succeed, I could still be an actress, and I felt that in Rose. I cried. I literally cried when I read it, because I think that, Delia, of course, she's this up-and-coming actress. She's having her momentum. She knows she's the center of attention in this party because she's the lead of the movie they're celebrating. But behind the smiles and the glam, she's not really comfortable in her own skin. And she comes to the party looking for a friend, and I think she finds it in Rose. And Rose helps her to start solving this conflict she has, because she's dealing with a personal and urgent matter that is she's having a hard time with it.
Can I say something about that?
Sure.
Because I think that's very interesting also, that you came to find this friendship. You didn't know that, but you needed it, and you really picked up on the loneliness. And I think Elizabeth played the loneliness, and it was really tricky, because she played the loneliness like self-aware and comedically at first, which is kind of what it is when you're living in it day in and day out. How do you not sort of have gallows humor about it? But then, it becomes very heart-wrenching when she's actually confronting the sources of her loneliness in the sort of Pedro Pascal plays the old flame, and then her husband, who has abandoned her within the marriage, and so I think that this friendship is so extraordinary. Again, the whole thing takes place in one night. To be able to sort of get all of these things going and in motion, and the way these actors sort of built that whole world so that it was alive from minute one, and it was happening, and it had an urgency and a necessity, this connection. But I think because Rose was stuck in her past in some way, because she didn't know how to integrate being a mother and being a woman. And so she's stuck in this living room, like literally and symbolically, with Helen and Delia. At one point, you see these women stuck together, and the party's out of reach. It's like the world that becomes out of reach because you don't know how to integrate yourself anymore. And when Rose confronts all of these things about herself and her past, all of a sudden she's unstuck, and she's able to take this sort of leadership position with Delia. You know, she's able to look at her with profound empathy and tell her something that no mother ever tells you, which is how lonely and how hard it is, you know, and what you're facing. And, you know, so anyway, that really is, that story in there is.
And it feels like it's heightened because of, you know, that certainly these characters are under different types of stress, but because they're all in this industry. I mean, we're in the Hollywood Hills. They're all agents and actors, right? I always wonder, like, was that part of the appeal? Like, do you like playing actors? Do you feel like you can kind of satirize yourselves a little bit when you take on these roles?
I was interested in it because it is so depressing to be an aging actress. It's a really horrible sort of thing to navigate, and so I was really fascinated by the idea, and that Nadia wrote that experience so well. But the idea of getting all these people stuck together in a house, I mean, that I just love that as a premise, is people stuck somewhere. And like, what's going to happen over the course of the night? But I do think, you know, Sammy's character, he plays an agent, like a power agent, and it felt very authentic and funny and dark. And it's really, to me, it felt very real as someone who lives in Los Angeles and is an actress. It felt frighteningly real. I
mean, Walton, were there like people in your circle that you were studying, agents and managers, as you were getting ready for this?
No, absolutely not. I've never talked to an agent at all. I lived in LA for 30 years. It's my favorite city in the world. And but there is regardless of how successful you are, there is a low-grade anxiety that is pervasive in that town. And whether you know it or not, you always want something, you know. And yeah, I mean, I've worked with a lot of people over the course of my career, and it's maybe an amalgamation of all of them. But at the end of the day, I do maintain that people just want to tell stories, and sometimes they lose sight of it, and things become more important than they really are. And you can lose sight of what's right in front of you, and life can pass you by.
Well, Lois, I mean, you've had such an amazing career. I have to ask you, on this subject, what has been your secret to surviving Hollywood?
I'm interested in the conversation being about aging actresses, about which I know almost nothing. And Walton talking about Los Angeles, where I have never lived, where I come and go. You see, there you go. I'm beginning to understand my whole life. Just sitting here.
Never moved to Hollywood.
I guess my secret is being just so fortunate. Now, how did that happen? Well, it's a combination of things, I'm sure, but I have been so fortunate. I started out with I moved to New York. My first job was a featured part in a Broadway play. This was in 1952. And before long, a couple of years, I was working in what was then live television and film. So because of that, I got to, early on, be able to make a living as an actress all the way through. Now, that is not always possible. I've just been fortunate. For me, the theater has been number one love, still is, but I couldn't have managed without the other loves that come along. So I've been, and I do love it. Storytelling, you got it, Walton. I think that's what we do. And I think that's worth doing.
There's one cast member I want to shout out who couldn't be here, Pedro Pascal, who you mentioned earlier, probably shooting like a Marvel or Star Wars. He's very in demand right now. But what has been your experience with Pedro? How was your experience filming with him on this?
Me?
Sure.
He's amazing, very supportive. In fact, we all spent a lot of time together, Elizabeth, Walton, myself, Pedro, during COVID, and so we had this connection that was sort of personal. And at that time, I was doing The Uninvited as a play, or it was supposed to be a play, but then all the theaters shut down and I started to reconceive it as a film. And it's not ironic that it was Elizabeth and Pedro and Walton and all, these people that we were sort of in this moment, in this world together. And, I asked him if he seemed to be perfect for the former love that was a late blooming movie star. And Elizabeth, you guys knew each other like back in the day. So you already had this incredible chemistry. The two of them play like former lovers in a weird way, Yeah. And so they had that back. I mean, it was just, it was unintended and then it was just right there. And then he did get very busy, but he had said yes. And he followed through with it, which was kind of amazing because it was really about, kind of hard to get the schedule to work, but everybody like Rosie and Ari and everybody in this room, huge gratitude and love for making this whole thing work, because the initial idea was we were going to run it like a play. But because everyone's schedule was so complicated, we ended up having to do the whole thing out of order, which was extremely hard, particularly on Lois and Elizabeth, because they had the lion's share of the scenes, and there were some funny moments where we were in the living room and we were kind of all sure we'd shot that scene before because you keep coming back to the same place. But anyway, that was off of Pedro's, schedule, and but we made it work.
What was your history with Pedro? Had you guys worked together before?
No, I don't think so. But Pedro claims that we met when we were like 21. We have a mutual friend. I don't remember that. But he over the years we've just known each other, and we have so many mutual friends. And Pedro, until sort of however many years since Game of Thrones, was just a normal guy, and now he's wildly famous. Now he's like an actual movie star.
Yeah.
But it makes sense if you know him, because he's truly himself. I mean, that is his. Who you see is who he is. He's just that person. He's so lovable.
And before we go, Walton, there's a lot of Justified fans on Screen Rant, so I've got to ask. I know it came back with City Primeval recently. Is there a future ever again for Boyd? What can you tell us?
There's always a future in my imagination.
Yeah.
Always. No, I think everybody, all the players involved, want one more lap. I didn't know. I didn't anticipate that, and it took a while to kind of jump back into that. But once we did it, we kind of kept it from everybody. I had such a good time, and I think Tim was inspired, and there is more to say. Actually, I didn't think there was, but there is, and so everything is in line. I think everybody's just waiting for schedules and FX to say go. So
I
we'll
can
see.
Feel the fans getting excited.
We'll see what happens.
Alrighty. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. We would love being your first stop.
Thank you.
Guys, one more time, the team from The Uninvited.
Oh yes.